Thank you for joining us as we continue our studies in Galatians. We're in Galatians chapter 2. I'm just going to read with you the first two verses. I'm trying to keep these sessions a little shorter so that folks find that they can listen to it and then it's not taking a lot of their time. Then they come back and listen to the next one next week. So Galatians chapter 2 verses 1 and 2. Then 14 years after I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas and took Titus with me. And I went up by revelation, and I communicated unto them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to them that were of reputation, lest by any means I should run or had run in vain. Now this is the start of a very interesting little section. I've divided chapter 2 into three sections, verses 1 to 10. Paul defends the gospel in Jerusalem, or he goes to Jerusalem to bring to those apostles, effectively those who were of reputation, he talks about in verse number 2, to show them that what he preaches was exactly the same as what they preached, but he'd received, as we learn from chapter 1, that message by divine revelation. Then verses 11 down to verse number 15, he defends the gospel in Antioch, and he actually has a confrontation, I suppose you would say. He withstands, he resists Peter on that occasion. And then from verse 16 to the end of the chapter, he's going to establish or restate these clear principles of the gospel. Now, we're learning here that there was a 14-year period from when he had been in Jerusalem for this type of issue before, and I use those words purposefully. Most who study the Bible would agree that Paul had been in Jerusalem between the visit that's recorded in chapter 1 verse 18, he says after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter, and this visit, which is 14 years after that. He goes up, for instance, in Acts chapter 11 with famine relief, and you've got details of that, Acts chapter 11, Acts chapter 12, but that doesn't seem to have featured here, because I think he's talking about visits where he is defending and establishing his apostolic authority. So, and I am told by those who have more knowledge of original languages of Scripture that linguistically, I think it's John MacArthur says, that linguistically the word again need not refer to the next visit. It can just as easily mean once again, not really talking about how many visits took place. Now this is most likely the visit that is recorded in Acts chapter 15. When you remember, there was a problem that had arisen in Antioch, and they go back to the source of the problem in Jerusalem and they deal with the issue there. Now, the slight difficulty in that one is Titus is not mentioned at all when it comes to going up in Acts chapter 15, but maybe that is just not relevant at that point, because Paul in this passage is going to use the example of men who were Greeks. So Titus, we're told when we get down to verse number 3, that he was a Greek, and Paul has been commissioned to take the gospel to the Gentiles, and so he's maybe Acts chapter 15 is Luke's record, and maybe Luke sees no relevancy in including Titus in that account. That may be the case. There are some things that we don't have definitive answers to as we study Scripture, but it would seem to be that it's very likely that it's exactly the same occasion when they visit. So there's a 14-year period since he last went up about apostolic gospel issues to defend the gospel. He goes up again and he takes with him Barnabas and he takes with him Titus. Now they're very interesting characters. I think it's Wearsby in his commentary in this says, let me talk to you about the cast, or the characters that are involved. And so Paul goes up. Now Barnabas that he went up with, he's one of Paul's very close friends. And we know that in Acts chapter 9, it was Barnabas who helped Paul when he came to Jerusalem, and he tried to come to meet with the believers, and they were very scared, and we learn that Barnabas, he opens the way for him in Acts chapter 9. Barnabas is a man whose name is called the son of encouragement, the son of consolation, and he's always encouraging someone if you look at his life. It was Barnabas who, when the Gentiles got saved, the gospel came to Gentiles in Antioch. It's Barnabas who was sent to encourage them in Acts chapter 11. And it's Barnabas who actually got Paul to come to Antioch later in that chapter. so that they work together, teaching and helping poor people. So Barnabas is a really important character in the life of the Apostle Paul, and he accompanied him on his first missionary journey. Now Titus, we read about Titus specifically in the book of Titus. We have references to him in 2 Corinthians. He is someone who's been saved, I take it, through the apostles' preaching and teaching, or at least he's been developed through the apostles' ministry. He's a man that he really trusts, and so he takes him up with him to Jerusalem. And as they go up, they're going to deal with this matter of the gospel that the Apostle Paul had received, and the validity of how he handled it in the sense of not going back to demand that people are circumcised, or to demand that people have to observe the ceremonial law of the Old Testament. Now we're going to come back to that then in verse 2. So we've only dealt with really verse 1 just now, but important to get that background. We'll come back in the next recording and we'll deal with verse 2. Thank you for your company. Please come and join us again.